The Jewish nation is in Egypt. Yaakov Avinu has his best years there. To be sure, when we say that Yaakov Avinu has his best years in Egypt, it doesn't only mean the 17 years that he lived. It means the years after he died. How can a person have his best years after he died? And of course the answer is, if a person lives for a purpose, as their purpose matures, their life becomes greater. So Yaakov Avinu is more alive after he passes away than during his life, because what he was materializes, it emerges, it manifests, it succeeds. And that's why the Parsha which talks about Yaakov Avinu's death is called Vayechi. We are learning these Sichos not only because they're interesting, but because we're learning them as part of a syllabus, part of a sequence that describes the phenomenon of Golus, of exile. One of the events in Parshas Vayechi which speaks to the phenomenon of Golus brilliantly, mamish brilliantly, is the story of Yaakov Avinu blessing his children. In the next couple of classes, not today, but the next week in Mitzvah Hashem, and the week after, we're going to be talking about the brachas that Yaakov gave his children. But before there is the bracha that Yaakov gave his children, there is the bracha that Yaakov gave Yosef's children. Yosef introduces his children to Yaakov Avinu with the words, Bonai asher nasam li elikim bazeh. These are my sons that God have given me bazeh. Now Rashi says bazeh means he showed him his ksubah, he showed him that he got married kosher. But bazeh also means here in Egypt. These children were born and raised in Egypt. Yaakov sees Yosef's children, and again Yosef introduces them to Yaakov Avinu as my children born bazeh in this place in Egypt. And Yaakov responds to this initial statement with a number of things. And one of the things he says, Ephraim Menashe kiruvin v'shimon yihi yuli. Your two children are my two children. So the Rebbe says in this Sikha, that we're going to learn now inside, that Yaakov marvels at this phenomena. Yosef has two sons in Mitzrayim. And it wasn't like Yosef was exactly hiding in a cave. He was at the center of power. And his children are so Jewish that Yaakov can't imagine how they could have been born in Mitzrayim and looking this way. And Yosef says, no, this is what happened. So Yaakov Avinu says, they're mine. Why? Because Yaakov represents survival and thriving in Golus. Of the three Avos, he represents the idea of going through Golus and coming out miraculously well. Not just surviving, but thriving. So Yaakov says, your two children, who were born and raised in Mitzrayim, look this way, they're mine. They represent what I represent. And like I told you a few minutes ago, the full life of Yaakov Avinu as a person who thrives and survives in the Golus doesn't emerge completely until after he dies. In the next generation, and the generation after, and the Jewish people succeed, you see the life of Yaakov Avinu. And that is the significance of Yaakov Avinu saying to Yosef, these children were born here, they were raised here, and they look this way, they're mine. But then there's an anomaly. There's a detail which is very, very disturbing. What's the anomaly? The anomaly is there's two of them. There's an older one and a younger one. Yosef presents the two children as though the older one is superior and the younger one is second. And Yaakov favors the younger one over the older one. But the reason this is problematic is because whatever Yaakov knew, Yosef knew. And whatever Yosef knew, Yaakov knew. These were very great people. So why would Yosef say to Yaakov Avinu, this is the older one, and Yaakov Avinu would say to Yosef, no, I like the younger one better. Where's the mistake? Who's wrong? Yosef knows whatever Yaakov knows. Yaakov knows whatever Yosef knows. So how do you explain how Yosef introduces the two children, Menashe first, and Yaakov Avinu says, no, I get, Menashe is older, but Ephraim is superior. How could both of those things be true simultaneously? Well, girls, this Sikha brilliantly elucidates that question, but most importantly, the elucidation puts a context on the concept of Golus, and the concept of surviving Golus, and the concept of thriving in Golus. There were two firstborns. Menashe is the firstborn, and Ephraim is the firstborn. What do you mean? One is older, one is younger. It depends on one aspect. Yossi presents them to his father as Menashe as being superior, and Yaakov says, I know, Ephraim is superior. Let's read. Now, girls, you know the program. If you will just read what I underlined, you won't get lost. If you get distracted, you're lost already. Yosef presents his two sons, Ephraim and Menashe. Far Yankovin, in front of Yankov Avinu, as Zol Zei benchen, he should bless them. Hat Yankov Arev gelegt sein rechte Hand auf Ephraim. Yankov Avinu crosses his hands and places his right hand on Ephraim, und sein linke Hand auf Menashe, and his left hand on Menashe. When Yosef does this, then Yaakov sees that Yosef sees that Yaakov Avinu crosses his hands. Is Vayera be'enav. Yosef was upset about it. Vayema Yosef alavi. Yosef says to his father, Lo yecheinavi, that's incorrect. Kizeh Menashe abchor. Menashe is the older one. Sim yemincha al reish, put your right hand on his head. And Yaakov says, I know he's older, but the younger one is greater than the older one. Is der fun gedrungen. When you read this story, what's obvious is as follows. As trotzdem, on the one hand, was der achiv hakoton yigdal mimenu v'goymen, that the younger brother would be greater than the older brother, as indicated in Yaakov Avinu's actions, is abada maile Menashe. At the same time, the firstborn is not Ephraim, it's Menashe. Legabi Ephraim, un mitzad der maile, and because of this advantage, is dei b'chor from Yosef. In a way, Menashe is more important than Ephraim. But Yaakov says, even though Menashe is more important than Ephraim, I'm telling you, Ephraim is more important than Menashe. Nor b'shayches zu birchas Yaakov. When it comes to Yaakov giving blessings, is wichtiger, it becomes more important. Der inyan, this idea, and welche Ephraim is hecher from Menashe, in which instance Ephraim is higher than Menashe, and the ribber is v'yoshev is Ephraim from Menashe, was Ephraim from Menashe. So of course, how can you explain Menashe is greater than Ephraim / Ephraim is greater than Menashe? It's a contradiction. Leave it to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, page 433. What do the names tell us? Menashe. What does the word Menashe mean? Al Shem ki nashani elekim es kol amoli ves kol beisavi. Hashem allowed me to forget the suffering of having left my father's house. Ephraim. Al Shem ki Efrani elekim be'eretzayin, that God has blessed me and made me fruitful in the land of my poverty. So Menashe is looking back. Ephraim is looking forward. Menashe is looking back. Oh, I came from such a wonderful place. I forgot the pain of losing it. Ephraim is looking forward to how wonderful is my life here. Says the Rebbe, Drikken ois die Gefühlen. These two names, these two ideas, express the feelings. Was the Yeride in Mitzrayim hat herausgerufen by Yosef. That descent into Egypt aroused in Yosef's heart. Nor yet der Nomen is a verkehrten Ktsei, but each of the two names brings those feelings out in a very different way. And here's how. Der Nomen Menashe, when Yosef names his older son Menashe, der Mont Yosefin, it reminds Yosef, as Neshani Beisav, he had to forget about his father's house, top of second column now, and therefore Driktoi sein Tshuka. When Yosef says, I forgot my father's house, what's he thinking? I miss it. His thirst to Zayin Farbuner Beisav, although he forgot the suffering, he's remembering the house. He's remembering where he came from. That's what the word Menashe connotes. I'm forgetting the hardships of losing my father's house, but I'm remembering the house. I want you to know, I know a man. I actually know a human being whose life has been hell on earth. I'm telling you, you can't imagine how difficult his life has been. And he's such a blessing. He's not his life is a blessing, his existence is a blessing. He named his oldest son Menashe. And I asked him why. He said, who's he named after? He says, I forgot my past. I was able to forget all my suffering. It's amazing. It's such a sensitivity. He's a very sensitive person. But Menashe means I forgot my suffering. But Menashe also means I remember what I once had. Ephraim, on the other hand, God made me fruitful in the land of my poverty. is a shevach vayda, it's a praise and a thanks of them iloi v'yisay nifrani, of the advantage and superiority, fruitfulness, v'osaba'im gevarin in Mitzrayim, which he achieved in Egypt. So Yosef names his two sons Menashe. Menashe is about his relationship to the past, and Ephraim is about his relationship to the future. Continues the Rebbe and he says, the reason he gave these two names is because there's two aspects to Yosef's survival in Egypt. Ein Eifin is. The first aspect of Yosef's survival in Egypt is represented by the word Menashe. What does Menashe mean? At the heart of it, he works very, very hard not to be adversely affected by his environment, and to remain perpetually attached to his past. Menashe means I forgot the suffering of my past, but I'm holding on to the values of my past, and I'm not letting Egypt corrupt me. On the other hand, it is in Eretz Anya, you find yourself in Egypt, in the Mchoshech HaGolos, in the darkness of the exile, bizan and over to the degree, as be'im is nitaf, as they feel, them zechorim from yourself, you may have forgotten your father's house. Und dorten haravetet, and in that environment one toils, zu balaichten dem Mchoshech HaGolos mit Eir HaKedush, to illuminate the darkness of Golos with the light of holiness. In other words, I'm not trying to hold on to where I came from, I'm trying to transform the place to which I came. And that's the spirit of the word Menashe and the word Ephraim. The word Menashe means I'm hanging on to my past. The word Ephraim means I'm transforming my present and my future into the will of God Almighty. So the Rebbe, so which is greater, Menashe or Ephraim? Depends on perspective. Let's keep going. The time for Ephraim is Yigdal and for Menashe. In the end, Yaakov Avinu says to Yosef, no, the younger one is older than the older one. Ephraim is superior to Menashe. Why? Because when we go into Golus, what's the point? To survive? To make it through? Or to transform it? To transform it. Not only come out stronger. To change the Golus itself. That's Ephraim. Because the ultimate advantage from the Yeridin, Mitzrayim, and Golus B'chlal, going into Egypt and into exile, is Yeridet Tzerech Aliyah, to descend, to ascend to a higher level. In other words, Hecher v'koydem ha'yeridet, to go higher than prior to the ascent. And the Rebbe says, in other words, to oiftan in Golos, to change the exile itself. Turn to page 434. So Ephraim is more important than Menashe. Why? Because Menashe means holding on to my past. Ephraim means changing my future, changing my environment. So Ephraim is older because the point of going into Golos is not only surviving, but thriving, changing the environment in which you've come into. Le'idach, on the other hand, is Menashe the Bchar. But who comes first? Menashe. Why? Kumt Menashe friye vi Ephraim. Why does Menashe come before Ephraim? Because Eidelman can oiftan and eretz anye yaseitei, before one can have a positive influence on the dark place in which he finds himself in, the first thing you have to do is strap yourself in. You have to make sure you don't get caught up. As men sollen bewirkt werden von dem Mchoshech HaGolos, not to be adversely affected by the darkness of the Golos. And then you can influence your environment. So the Rebbe says, who's the firstborn, Menashe or Ephraim? Depends in what way. If you're looking at the outcome, Ephraim is more important than Menashe. If you're looking at the process, Menashe is before Ephraim. You cannot change somebody else until you secure yourself. Securing yourself means holding on to your past. That's Menashe. Changing somebody else means looking into your future. That's Ephraim. So there's two perspectives. Menashe is the firstborn because that's the first thing Yosef did. Yosef came to Egypt. The first thing he did was guaranteed that he should remain who he was. That's Menashe. Then, once he felt secure in who he was, Ephraim, he began to change his environment. So from that perspective, Menashe comes first. But when the Golus is finished, and the Jewish people come out of the Golus, and they take along the prophets of the Golus, and the good of the Golus, the point of Golus is not to survive. In other words, the point of Golus is not Menashe. The point of the Golus is to transform Ephraim. So Yosef says Menashe is the firstborn because he's describing the sequence in which it's done. Yaakov says Ephraim is the firstborn because Yaakov is not talking about the order in which it's done. He's talking about the point of it all. The point of it is to transform Egypt. So they could both be right. Yosef says, I couldn't do Ephraim without Menashe. I couldn't change Egypt unless I was strong on my own values. So Menashe comes first. So Yaakov says, I know Menashe comes first. But after Menashe comes Ephraim, and once Ephraim emerges, he's the purpose. He's the point of it all. Clear, very clear. We'll continue to read. Bottom of the first column, 434. In dem Eloi v'Yisra, in this advantage, was tut sich uf in a Yid, that is affected in a Jew, in Cheshach HaGolus, in the darkness of Golus, says the Rebbe, Zayne Faran Kama in Yonim, there's a variety of different ideas. In our effect on the Golus, there's several ideas. Aleph, number one, the Yiri, the Ruf Tarayif, the Mtekef and the Neshama. When you have a hardship, you dig deeper into yourself, you bring out more power from your Neshama. Nitzuba wird werden for the Cheshach HaGolus, that the Golus shouldn't affect you adversely. You come to a difficult situation, you dig deeper, you call out deeper powers from your Neshama to survive it. Second column, 434. Beis, the second way is, when a person descends to a very low level, not only does it call out deeper levels of the neshama, but brings them tifer to take it from the neshama. It actually enhances the neshama itself. Not only when you have hardships, you dig deeper into your neshama. When you have hardships, the neshama digs deeper. In other words, you discover powers in your neshama that the neshama itself didn't know it had until then. Gimel, bottom of the second column, 434. One transforms not only himself, but the environment of the Golus into light. The neshama benefits by changing his environment. Was his nita in ir mitzad atzman, which the neshama does not have by itself. And he gives you the example, bidugmas habal tshuva, like for example a returnee, a person who's doing tshuva, who also has merits, that came from transforming sins into merits, which a tzaddik does not have. So the third idea is that when you go into Golus, you not only survive the Golus, but you transform the Golus. And in transforming the Golus, you're in effect transforming darkness into light. So we just read three ideas. The first two ideas are describing the neshama's benefit. The third idea is describing the world's benefit. Not only do you dig deeper, not only do you discover more, but you change the world around you. Tzivov, very, very bottom, page 434, the mitvet men verstehen. This explains the chiluk zwischen Menashe and Ephraim, the difference between the two personalities of Menashe and Ephraim. Beide, 435 at the top. Beide, Zayin and Kinder for Yosef. Both of them are sons of Yosef HaTzadik. What does Yosef means? They bring out Zayin Inyan. They bring out the point of Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef Havaya Li Bein Achet. That Yosef's idea is to go into Golus and to transform an alien, someone who's far away, into a son for the Eibishter. But in different ways. Menashe, the takeoff as they call it from Beis Avi Kanal, Menashe tries to remember the past. The takeoff on Neshama was in Galig Varama Yosef. The past is the power of Yosef's Neshama durch seine Aveda Mitzrayim through its work in Egypt. So Menashe means I'm drawing strength to be able to transform my world from my past. Ephraim weiß aber, and Ephraim indicates if Yisrael Ne'er was as Dimshach Yavadim Menacheshach Atzma, in additional light, which comes from the darkness itself. That the Eibusha gives makes me fruitful in the land of darkness. Das heißt Hazeh. Menashe represents helping myself. Ephraim means affecting not just me, but my entire world. Bottom of the first column, page 435. Va'ata. So Yosef, this is what I told you at the beginning of the Yosef comes to his father, Yankov, introduces his two children. Yankov raises his head and takes a look at them. Says, "Whoa, where'd you get these? Where'd you get these kids?" Now Rashi has another interpretation of where he got these, but we're going with the interpretation is these are very holy children. Where were these children raised? They went to Haile Torah, they went to Haile Lubavitcher Yeshiva. Where they learn? He says they grew up in Egypt. They went to public school. So how do you raise such children? So he says, Menashe and Ephraim. I never forgot my fast, and I saw myself as someone who was to change the present and the future. So Yankov Avinu says, your children are my children. Va'ata. Now, Shnei Banecha, your two sons, Haneladim Lecha be'eretz Mitzrayim, they were born to you in the land of Egypt. Ad Bayi Elecha Mitzrayim, until I joined you in Egypt. Lihe, they're mine. Ephraim and Menashe, Kiruv v'Shimon Yuli, they're equal to me as my two sons, Reuven and Shimon. Explains the Rebbe. Farvozeh zayin shaykhes to Yankov Avinu lihem. Yankov is explaining to him why they belong to Yankov Avinu. That mitzadeh, considering the fact, Vozeh zayin gebaring of Yosef in Beretz Mitzrayim, they have learned to Yosef in Egypt. But before anybody else came, Yosef was alone. And nevertheless, they turned out as well as they did, says Yaakov Avinu, lihem their mind. Because Yaakov Avinu says, my whole purpose and mission is the survival and the transformation of Galus. These two children have and continue to represent this. However, continues the Rebbe, he says, in them, when it comes to this idea that Yaakov says to Yosef, your two children are mine, what is he saying? Your two children are survivors of the darkness of the ghost, which is my purpose. Those children, your kindalach, are my kids. So what is the key? What is the most important thing in a Jewish person surviving the ghost from Yaakov's perspective? And the answer is, in them inyan, in as much as this is concerned, Yaakov puts Ephraim first. So the Rebbe explains, if you lost a place and you want it, 435 at the bottom. Vibal das Menashe. Since Menashe, Weist, shows, Visivet nicht nifsek, there's no interruption between them Zikoren, the memory, and the Shayches zum Beisavi, to the past of my father's house, Kanal Baruch. Menashe doesn't let you forget Yaakov Avinu's house. No. If you haven't forgotten Yaakov Avinu's house, are you completely in Golus? No. You're holding on to your past. Says the Rebbe, Kumtaisa turns out, as mitzadem a person who always holds on to his past, that type of service is netad der emetz amatzeh fun ad be'lecha mitzrayim. It's into page 46. So if a child holds on to his past, he's not fully in the new place where he is. If you keep remembering your past, you can't go into your future. Let me give you a very simple example. Yeah? Jewish people came from Europe to America. How many generations ago? Depends who you ask, right? Some people it's 5 generations, some people it's 6 generations, some people it's 7 generations, and some people it's 1 or 2 generations. How do they survive as from Jews? How do they survive as from Jews? They hold on to the old country. The minute they let go of the old country, they assimilate, right? They melt, they get lost, correct? True. But is that how the Jewish people got to the point they're at right now? By holding on to the old country? Holding on to the country means you're old. Which means your kids are not going to want to be like you. You want to come to America and be Jewish, you have to become an American Jew. Emphasis on the word Jew, not the word American. So Menashe represents holding on to your identity by keeping your past. Ephraim is holding on to your identity by creating your future. And the Rebbe says, so long as you hold on to your past, you haven't fully come to America. If you haven't fully come to America, you can't fully transform America. Next paragraph, 436 at the top. There are mitis hamatzav, the true idea, von ad until you come to Egypt and become not just a survivor of the Galus, but a transformer of the Galus, is an Eifan Haveda von Ephraim. It's the service of Ephraim. But Bavais that shows, as man gefindt sich be'eretz ani, you're in a very bad place. As that sich nicht an bechitzenia sein verbunden mit Yaakov Beisavi. On the outside, you don't see how he's making HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Und von deswegen, even though you don't see his nostalgia and his connection to his past, nevertheless, is that Eved Avidasi, he serves his master. But in such a fashion, as this is in Im Nika, you see in him, as there's Yaakov Avinu, as Yaakov Avinu's grandson. So, Yosef says to his father, Menashe is first. Why? Yosef says, you know how I survived? I never forgot where I came from. That's why I was able to thrive here. And Yaakov says, I'm making your 2 sons mine. But in the reverse order, Ephraim's older. Why? Because my issue is not holding on to your past. It's creating a new future in Golus. And that's represented by Ephraim. So to get to the point, Yosef knows what Yaakov is thinking, Yaakov knows what Yosef is thinking, and they still disagree. How does that make sense? Yosef knows what Yaakov is thinking, what Yosef is saying, Papa, the way this is done is first of all you anchor yourself in your past, then you look to your future. And Yaakov says to Yosef, I know that, but the point is not to be anchored to the past. The point is that you should be able to transform into a Jew in Golus and thrive. So therefore Yaakov puts Ephraim first and Yosef puts Menashe first. If I may say so, and if I may not say so, that is absolutely brilliant. This vision that the Rebbe just gave us, this exchange between Yaakov and Yosef is brilliant. And of course the point of it is the survival of the Golus. And the Rebbe continues on page 437. And he breaks it down. He says, there's three ideas of Golos. Number one, Aleph. Yaakov was mitzad atzmei is a hechef Mitzrayim. Yaakov is altogether above Egypt. Beis. Yosef was beleicht Mitzrayim and dashpof Yaakov. Yosef HaTzadik himself lives in Egypt, but he's a king in Egypt. Gimel. Bnei Yosef, the children of Yosef. Was they're lying in them choychech Mitzrayim, they're part of the darkness of Egypt. Via it is b'tzarafim, it is by itself, and he survives. They thrive. What's the difference between Yaakov, Yosef, and his children? Yaakov is above the Golos. Yosef reveals God in the Golos, and Yosef's children struggle through the Golos. In the first idea, as mitzad dem teikef haneshama shalamayla, that a Yiddish neshama is attached to Hashem, and can their Golos nitpelen can you read in the neshama Golos cannot touch the neshama. If you come into this world just like you were in Gan Eden, it turns out, as says Ki'ilu v'min blight b'Havdalah, you're removed from the Golos. Hecha from Golos, page 437, top of the second column. If you come into Golos and you're always holy, you're not in the Golos. Der zweite Ringen, the second idea, as legabi dem teikaf neshama, that you come into the Golos, but your neshama is so strong, is nechayches kei menagid. You're so powerful in Golos, you see darkness and you beat it up. The darkness is transformed into life, is bedugma to avodas Yosef. It's Yosef's avodah. Yaakov Avinu never goes into Golos. Yosef HaTzadik masters the Golos. Menashe and Ephraim become the Golos. Und der Yisen, the advantage of light, was wird nimshach von dem choyshach gufa, that comes from the darkness itself. When you are part of the Golos, that ufgetan beikir is achieved primarily durch der Aveda in the choyshach from Mitzrayim, when you are part and you're working with and in the darkness of Egypt. You don't see the power of being above the Golos. You don't see the power of conquering the Golos. You see the transformation of the Golos. In other words, your children born here, before I revealed myself, these are my children. So Yaakov is above the Golos. Yosef is stronger than the Golos. Menashe and Ephraim deal with the Golos. And Yaakov says that they're mine because they're going to finish what my mission is. Not just to survive Golos, but to transform. And by the way, I'm going to stop here, okay? I don't want to exhaust you. I just a very interesting word. The Rebbe says an amazing thing. And a very, very important thing. At the end of the Sicha, on page 438, which I'm not reading with you, the Rebbe says a very interesting thing. A lot of people think the Eibush gives you hardships. And sometimes they're very hard. And you deal with them. Deal with them well. And you think to yourself, I'm a hero. I've been given a bad hand. I've been given a very difficult situation. I've done so well with it. So the Rebbe says, no, you haven't. You haven't done well with a bad situation until you are fruitful in it. You haven't done well in a bad situation until you profit from it. Surviving a bad situation is wonderful. Turning a bad situation into a good situation is the reason you were given the bad situation. So Yosef tells Yaakov Avinu about survival. And Yaakov Avinu says to Yosef, what do you have to survive? You could have stayed in Israel. You were sent here not to survive, thrive. Your success isn't measured in your survival. Your success is measured in your transformation. And that's what Ephraim represents. So if you wanted to tie this Sikha that we just learned into the syllabus that we're having, what is the message? Not only does Hashem give us a hardship, is there a purpose? And not only that when Hashem gives us a hardship, is there a possibility for us to survive it, otherwise He wouldn't give it to us. But the point of that hardship is to be a winner. Otherwise He wouldn't give it to you. And you only know that you've succeeded with the hardships when you turn them around into blessing, when you make them into Ephraim.